Welcome everyone to this session, 100 Years of Betty with Debra Oswald. And I'm very keen to introduce Debra, but before I do, I'd like to find out who you are. So can we have a show of hands? Who likes to swim? Ideal for today. And so does Betty. Who likes to dance? So does Betty. Who likes to write? Betty does too. And who likes to read? And Betty does as well. Welcome to you all. To introduce Debra, Debra's books span the spectrum from children's books such as Nathan and the Ice Rockets from the legendary Aussie Bite series, which had a little bite out of the corner of each book, to young adult novels such as Getting Air and Blue Noise, to novels for adults, The Whole Bright Year and The Family Doctor, and for TV, amongst other shows, Bananas in Pyjamas, Police Rescue, The Secret Life of Us, and Offspring. She has also written and performed a one-woman play with the title, Is There Something Wrong with That Lady? So we can see that she's very versatile. Debra's new novel is 100 Years of Betty. Now this is an epic. It's a vast saga told on an intimate canvas, and it's a compulsive read. I really couldn't stop reading once I started. And since I've been reading it, every second person that I've come across seems to be reading it. It's entertaining, it's funny in parts, and it also covers the whole gamut of emotions. It's a mixture of readability and 100-year-old life's worth of content. It uses cinematic storytelling to show peaks and troughs of life, and it's also a social history that Betty herself describes as written in a doggedly chronological account. And Betty also hopes that it gives a certain kind of illumination in the sweep of one individual's existence over a long period. So please welcome Debra.
Thank you. Thanks, Joy. Is that on? Am I on? Am I on? Yes. Good.
So Debra, we're actually going to start with a 3-question quick quiz.
Okay. Oh, God.
So you don't really have to think about the answers, just
Okay.
whatever comes into your head straight away. So question 1, B1 or B2?
They are one personality within 2 banana bodies. They are one person.
Okay. Nina or Billy?
Oh, again, they're bits of me in both of them.
Okay.
So that writers often do that.
Betty or Rose?
So Betty is the main character of the book, and Rose is her daughter. Again, I'm both of them because Rose is roughly my generation, and Betty is, shock you to know I'm actually not 100. And Rose is much more my generation. So there are aspects of Rose's experience that I connect to, but I've put a lot of my emotional tissue into Betty, even though she's an older generation to me.
Thank you. I just wanted to start about talking about your children's and YA books very briefly. I love how you write across the spectrum of those, and also books for adults, including crime and screen and play writing. And interestingly, Betty also wrote in many of those forms, but not for children and young adults. So do you regard your early career in writing for children and young adults with affection? And what did you learn about writing from writing for young people?
Right. So I started off writing plays when I was 12. Before anybody told me you weren't supposed to do that. I started off not writing for kids. I started off thinking I was writing for grown-ups, but I was a kid. And then later in my 20s, I wrote for children and adults simultaneously. And then when I had my own kids, you know, the inspiration was there to write for children because you're living your whole life thinking like each age group that they are. Like, I couldn't write Bananas in Pyjamas now. Actually, maybe I could because I have grandtoddler. So anyway, I think the principles are the same. It's about engaging people, creating characters that people care about, not being boring, making the story have a drive that will keep people going. Maybe in a way, writing for young people, and particularly writing theatre for young people, they take no prisoners. So you learn you've got to capture them and keep them. So you're not there. They're not being impressed by you being clever. And I think sometimes with writing for adults, people get caught up in some notion about showing how clever they are. Well, kids are not going to be taken in by that. So maybe she's really good. It's funny, I've never thought about this till you asked it. That's why she's very good at this. I think maybe writing for children gave me a kind of honesty that I hope I bring to my adult writing as well. Yeah.
I love that answer. I want to show again the cover of 100 Years of Betty. And my question about this is, what do you love about this cover, and what expectations and anticipations do you think it's going to give your readers?
I love it. I think it's gorgeous. I think it's about, she's at the centre of something, but she's a tiny dot in the centre of a huge world, and there's lots of different colours, which is part of the fabric of the book, has all sorts of different colours in it. So I guess that's what it is, yeah. Mm. And she sort of looks vulnerable, but she's standing up. She's still standing.
Oh. And continuing on from that, thinking about playlists, you've organised a playlist, a musical playlist to suit the book.
Yes.
So what are some of the songs that you've included in that?
Yeah, so when I was writing the book, I would get myself into the mood of each era by making up a playlist for myself. And I ended up creating, there's a playlist on Spotify called 100 Years of Betty. I recommend it. And it starts with Fred Astaire singing Top Hat, and there's lots of swing music. But then it goes through all the different eras of Betty's life, right up to contemporary stuff. And some of the tracks are there. So there's Greek music and there's mariachi music, which tells you something about her travels. And sometimes I put in tracks out of chronological order because they fit the theme. So Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 is in there to cover Betty's years as a secretary. And Johnny Cash singing Hurt, which is I challenge you not to cry. And I put that in when Betty is at her lowest point. So it's really fun to feel how the music changed. And I put in Get Smart theme music. So there's all kinds of stuff.
So what genre is the novel? And the question that everyone's going to ask is it based on anyone's real life?
Yeah. So it's sort of a fictional autobiography, if that sounds like a thing. There's a genre that there's not a lot of books in, but called the whole of life novel. So I don't know if anyone's read William Boyd's novel Any Human Heart. It's one of my favourite books. So that's about a man's whole life, and you move through all these historical eras with him. But then I think about other big sprawling books like Pachinko or Dickens, or any of those books where there's a big sweep of time, and I really enjoy that. So I guess the book started for me because I was thinking about my mum, who was born in pretty much the same place and time as Betty, and I thought about how much the world changed during her life, and how much has changed even during my 65 years. And I thought there was something really compelling about sticking with one person through all those changes, and particularly a woman. The world's changed so much for women in those 100 years, and to kind of see how the story plays out. You know, like when you meet her children, you know you're going to find out what happens to them because we've got another 80 years to go. And I find that satisfying as a reader, so I thought I would have a crack at it.
It really seems like a female perspective of 100 years. So,
Yes.
yeah, very broad scope, but also lots of detail.
Yeah, so that was one of the tricks with it, that I had to move quite fast, so it wasn't impossibly long. But I wanted us to sort of do deep dives emotionally, and to zoom in for the odd moment. And I should say earlier, in answer to your question, it's a bit based on my mum. So some of the earlier stuff, my mother was one of 12, grew up in South London in a very poor family. She was evacuated in the war, and the house was bombed in the Blitz, and she came to Australia as a 10-pound pom. So some of that is based on my mum. And my mother was a very fierce feminist and was denied an education like so many women of her generation. And she was kind of a really smart, strong woman who didn't get the chance that she should have got. And I think that's the story for many women, particularly of my mother's generation. And then there's lots of stuff that's me, you know, like I worked as a nude model for artists. I was 18, you know, try and use your imagination. And I worked in 1980s television drama. Again, I give Betty that experience. So, and then when you're writing 100 years and lots of characters, you have to basically take material from every human being you've ever met in your life. So there's enough. And also I'm a mother, so a lot of the book is about what it's like to be a mother, you know, from little babies right through to when they have their own babies. So I guess I could pinch from my own experience there.
That's a fantastic overview, and we'll touch on some more of those in a little bit more detail. I was curious about the name Betty. So you've called your main character Betty, but there's also derivations of her name throughout the story. So how do the different names that you call your main character reflect her life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So she's christened Elizabeth after the Queen, who was born 2 years before her, but no one in South London ever calls her anything except Betty. I don't think I'm giving things... When she's evacuated, the very kind woman who takes her in, she's so nervous because she's 11 and she's been sent away from home. Did you know... Sorry, I'm diverting. Nearly 900,000 children left big cities in the UK on one day and were sent off on trains to live with strangers. I mean... I know we sort of know it, but it's astonishing, isn't it? Anyway, this woman who takes her in says, she says, "Are you called Beth?" And Betty really likes... Sorry, isn't this weird? I feel quite emotional thinking about it. She's a made-up character. And Betty feels so safe with this woman that she's Beth with her. And then later on in Australia, she takes on the persona of Elizabeth when she's acting a bit posh and takes on an accent to go with it. And I think a lot of people coming to Australia sort of recreated themselves. Certainly my mother-in-law did, but that's another story. And then later in life in Australia, people call her Lizzie, because that's what Australians do, don't they? So she has various different names.
And I thought it was interesting, there was one derivation of Betty or Elizabeth that you didn't use.
Which was Bet.
Yes.
Yes.
Was there any reason for not using that?
Just ran out of time. Because at one point, again, spoilers, so forget everything you've heard today. She gets involved in the 1980s with the AIDS crisis in Sydney. And one of her very dear friends is a gorgeous gay man called Rex Lightfoot. And I wanted the gay community to call her Bet, you know, after Betty Davis. But I ran out of time. But it was my plan, so clever you for spotting it.
So Betty was born in 1928 as one of 10 children, and as you're hearing, her life spans 100 years. So how have you built layers of social and cultural history into Betty's life so that you've made her more than a character? Even the fact that you felt emotional thinking about her as a girl. Yeah, how have you made her more than a character because of what you've built into her life? You might like to talk about some of the things that she experienced.
Yeah, so that was one of the challenges really, to kind of have that sweep of time and draw history into it, but not have it feel like a sort of schematic, you know, hitting all the points. So, and I suppose the rule of thumb was her connection with the historical movement had to be plausible for her, for a woman in her situation. So I make sure that she has a child young enough that he's conscripted to the Vietnam War. I have to, because I want her to be a devoted mother, she can't go and have adventures until I park her children safely, momentarily, so she can head off and live in Mexico for 3 years, or get very involved in the women's movement or whatever. So I had certain historical moments that I knew I wanted to hit, and then I had to find ways, and lots that I would have liked to have included but couldn't. And then I tried to kind of find a plausible way for Betty to be connected. So for the Vietnam War, for example, her connection plausibly would be that she is the mother of a conscript. The AIDS crisis, her plausible connection is that she is emotionally connected to a young man who's dying. So I tried to kind of fold her in like that. And the post-war migration phenomenon, that's easy because so many young Poms came here. So I guess that was the process. So, and I had certain points that I knew I wanted to reach, and it's so complicated. I had a chart with the year that all my characters were born, and then I would cross-reference that with the year I was up to, and I'm not very good at sums, and try to make sure that everyone was roughly the right age I needed them to be.
So one of the things that Betty experiences is the rise of feminism in Australia. And so do you want to just talk a little bit about Betty's involvement in that and how that corresponds with what actually happened?
Yeah, so earlier in her life, because it was really important to me that Betty is writing in 2028, so she's got a modern mindset about her experiences, but when she's in the moment, she could only have, when she's describing what she was feeling, it can only be the feelings of someone who really was 17 or 19. So earlier in her life, before the women's movement kind of lands for her, she's experiencing things like what happens when women have unwanted pregnancies, or being denied an education because you're a girl. And that's actually one of the things in the book that is true, that sounds most made up. My mother got into a special school and her parents hid the letter and never told her. And years later, one of my mum's brothers showed her the letter. And that really happened to my mum. So I think so Betty experiences these things as a woman, but then in the 1970s, the sort of women's movement is in the world, and she goes to women's liberation meetings. And that was one of the things I most wanted to get right, and that was very hard to write well, because, I partly wrote this book for my daughters-in-law who are women in their 30s. My own children don't read. But luckily they shacked up with women who do. And I wanted to... and I think a lot of people, women in their 30s, people my age, we know the history in our heads, but to truly sit with the idea of the fact that a woman couldn't get a passport without her husband's signature until 1983. If you were in an abusive relationship without financial means, you were stuck until Whitlam brought in supporting parents' benefits. So I think to have readers really sit with the emotion of that with a character, and then by the time women's liberation really hits, Betty is 42, she's a mother of 2, she's working as a secretary wearing gabardine skirts and court shoes and pantyhose. So she goes to meetings with all these sort of, very clever young university women wearing, orange knitwear. And she feels inadequate, and she feels, I don't belong here. I feel, because she's got terrible low self-esteem about her lack of education. I mean, she's a goer and she's game, but she has these pockets of terrible low self-esteem. And she thinks, I don't belong here. And she goes to creep out of the meeting until she hears something that makes her think, something that I think a lot of women felt at that time, which is that the things that are wrong in my life are not my own personal failings. It's a bigger system. Other women feel this. And to try and a lot of the things that she learns seem so obvious to us now, and you think, yeah, of course. But to understand that for a woman in 1972, that was a revelation, and that was thrilling and liberating with all the meaning of that word. So I hope I've sort of made that land for younger readers in the way that I hope. It was very powerful, and it was news to a lot of women. They reconfigured their reality in a new way. Yeah.
That was devastating to hear that powerful scene where Betty realised that she had received the invitation to go to the grammar school.
Sort of, the equivalent.
Yeah.
In 1930,
was actually just hidden.
Yeah.
And that's from a true event.
Yes,
Yes.
I mean, I mention it because often those things sound so made up, but sometimes
Yes,
the most
yes.
weird things are actually the truest.
And you referred to the secretaries. There was some really interesting scenes where almost like a sisterhood of secretaries would look out for each other. Did you want to briefly just say
Yeah,
some
so
of the
when
things
she
they
works
did?
in an office, there's all the groping men. And this is her working in an office in the 1960s, but I can tell you working in television drama in the 1980s, it was much the same. And she talks about how they had like a secret martial art for ducking away from men without making the men feel bad about themselves. And when the young guys would come back from the Angus steak cave full of Johnny Walker whiskey. So I feel I've touched some nerves here. The women would write warning notes to each other in Pitman's shorthand because the men couldn't read it. So, and Betty feels guilty about when she talks about it because she says, arguably they were colluding, but at the time that was the best people could do, Yeah.
And you've talked a little bit about motherhood. Why do you think there's been a recent escalation of novels and other books by Australians and probably globally as well about motherhood and strong women's friendships? Can you put your finger on any reason for that?
No, I'm delighted that that's so, because I think they're two things that... I think there's often this idea that there are certain books that are about important topics and friendship and motherhood are considered sort of light women's topics, and that's just bullshit. So, to me, I mean, motherhood is not the experience for all women, obviously, but for Betty it's this very defining thing. And that was what was so great about being able to carry it over the whole arc of the process. And also to imagine life from the point of view of her children, which was not always easy. And the same is true for women's friendship, because Betty meets three people she comes out to Australia on the SS Asturias in 1947 when she's 19, and she meets three people on the boat who were part of her life for the next 80 years. And two of them are two very strong female friends. And I think that's so interesting about friendship over the long haul, the times when it goes wrong and the complications, but the kind of strength of it in the end. And that by the time those women are in their 80s, you only have to have a little moment between them, and hopefully it will land with the power of the fact that you know what they've all been through up to that point. And I mean, look, motherhood is important in the book, and politics and creative life are important in the book, but I reckon the kind of gold vein is friendship through it. As it is in life, don't you think? Especially once your children have gone. Bugger them. It's the friends.
Can you tell us a little bit about Betty's really good friends, Athena and Pearl, then?
So her two friends are Athena, who's a young woman, a Greek woman from Castellorizo, who's coming to Australia to marry a man she's only written letters to. And she's fabulous. She's very strong, incredibly dignified and prideful in a way that sometimes gets in her own way. But she's absolutely a stalwart friend to Betty, and there are rifts between them, but eventually very powerful. And she has some, I won't give it away, but she has some interesting twists and turns along the way. And her other friend is called Pearl, who's a kind of Yorkshire party girl, very, very pretty, incredibly sunny, incredibly optimistic, thinks the best of everyone, quite naive, and disarmingly so. I mean, she says to Betty the first time they meet, "I really like you. Will you be my friend?" What? Like a sort of 5-year-old in the playground. And there's something, I think, very, very engaging about that. And she was so fun to write because she's so different to Betty, and she's so different to me, someone whose kind of currency is her looks, but is good, very good-hearted as well. And I found that I loved her. She became a bigger part of the book than I thought she was going to be, because I could tell so much story through her that I couldn't tell through Betty, for some of which I don't want to give away, but it's partly about the whole role of looks and appearance in women's lives. That is sort of not Betty's story. She's kind of too busy. But also she's such a delightful wild card to throw into a scene, because I never quite knew what would happen. And the minute I put her in a scene, I thought, oh, of course, that's what Pearl would do. And she's so fun, and I really love her. Again, made up.
I have to say, when I was recently at the hairdresser, I had Betty, the book, with me, and the person next to me was sort of eyeing off, trying to work out what I was reading. She had another book. She was a former head of an English department and still is an English teacher. And she had just been telling the hairdresser all about Betty. An amazing coincidence, but she wanted to talk to me about Pearl.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm so glad.
Yes. So you mentioned before that you have done some life modelling.
I was at university. I was 18.
And so Betty was a life model, and she modelled for an artist called Cyrus John O'Farrell. So is he based on a real person?
No.
No.
He's not. I did some research on lots of painters who were painting in roughly that era, and I wrote a play called Mr. Bailey's Minder that's about a woman who gets to be the live-in carer for an alcoholic painter. So I guess some of that I pinched from that. But no, he's made up. And I like him too. I like them all.
Yes.
Almost.
Almost. Yes. And the book does go on to explore both positive and negative sides of art, which I found really fascinating. So art and creativity is a wonderful gift, but there also can be some downsides as well. Who has read the book already? Okay. And you make mention of the children's classic, The Secret Garden. And I've noticed that a number of authors whose books I've been reading in recent times have been mentioning The Secret Garden. So why The Secret Garden? Why does it strike a chord?
Oh, I read it so long ago I can't remember it. That was really me thinking, a friend of Betty's, I won't say who, because it's an unexpected... I should say there's a love story that winds its way through the book, but there are many gaps and torturous turns in it. But there's a point at which that man gives Betty's children some books. So I just wanted to think about what would be the books that would be right for the time, that would suit that character. The other one that I mentioned was They Found a Cave by Nan Chauncey. Did anyone read that as kids? I bought it again the other day. I'm going to read it and see if it's still any good. So there was no particular obsession with that, no.
Okay. Because my other hat is promoting children's young adult books, so I love having these references to fantastic children's and other books. So just to touch on your screenwriting, so you're obviously a gifted storyteller and you've written plays and for TV as well. So do you want to tell us a bit more about how you've incorporated screenwriting into Betty's life, and possibly also about how screenwriting is different from other types of writing and how it can be quite difficult?
Sure. So from Betty's point of view, I think that you can see there's a sort of creative urge in Betty from when she's quite young. She writes stories. When she's evacuated, she writes stories back to her sister in London, little made-up stories to entertain her little sister. Then when she's a struggling single mother with very little money, she writes strange but true letters for the Women's Weekly, which could earn actually quite a lot of money. So she has all these false other personas that she writes the letters. So she writes stories and really partly keeps the household afloat writing those. So it's interesting that every time she has a chance to write something, she's a storyteller. And then when she's in her 50s, she gets a job as a typist in a TV production office, and she's just typing. And at one point, they turn to her and say, "What would happen in this scene?" what would a woman do? Betty, you're a woman. And I've seen that happen, where women are in the room as kind of sort of expert witnesses, like they're doctors or lawyers for being women. And she ends up by accident becoming a screenwriter. And I was a little bit worried that I was pushing my luck with plausibility. But I spoke to a producer friend of mine and I said, this is what I'm doing, do you think that makes sense? And he says, oh, you mean like, and then he reeled off a list of women in their 40s and 50s who became television drama writers by being secretaries and dogs' bodies in the office and clearly were clever and just ended up writing the script. So that was, I mean, I felt, phew.
I love the descriptions of being in, is it called the writer's room?
Writer's room, yeah.
Yes, where the writers take on different roles, like one might be the devil's advocate and someone might be happy to be like the dumb person who puts forward the different idea. So, yeah, these were really graphic, interesting scenes, but it sounds like it got too hard for Betty.
Yes, I'm nervous of giving away a story here. There's a point at which it gets too hard for her, and arguably maybe that's what's happened to me. TV is like, it's great. I mean, I love writing television because when you're working on a show with wonderful colleagues, it's the best fun a human being can have so there are probably other better ways to have fun, but the second best way is to be in a room with other writers where you're talking about characters that you care about and everyone's contributing and there's very little ego in the room, everyone's just trying to make, and you're sort of mapping out the series on whiteboards with coloured markers and then making each other laugh so much you think you're going to wet your pants. I mean, like, it's just great. And then the process of watching it getting made. But the downside is it's very hard to get... I haven't got a TV project up since Offspring, and that's 10 years ago. Not for want of trying. And you don't have power. I mean, in the end, an actor will say, I don't think I'd say that line, and you're going to have to change the line. Whereas all the characters say exactly what I want them to say in this. And then, and there's so many things that are out of your control. It rains, so you lose the location or whatever. So the fun about writing novels is that I can have my best go at telling the story I want to tell. And I'll always fall short because, you never quite get where you want, there's this brilliant book in your head and then there's this book. But at least I can have a go at being precise. But it's lonely, and so I march around the house and sort of talk to myself as if I'm talking in a writer's room, and I bother my friends to help me.
But now you're on book tour, so you can be having lots of fun with other people. I know there's at least one doctor in the room, and I've noticed across your body of work that you have a number of doctor characters. The main character in Wattle Creek, which is one of the TV shows that Betty's working in, is a female doctor, and one of the main characters in Betty becomes a doctor. I've
written a book about kidney donation. It's funny.
In Offspring, major character, and you wrote a crime novel called The Family Doctor. So what is it with you and doctors?
Look, I was a childhood hypochondriac. I mean, not a lightweight one. I was like having to go to the doctor from the age of 8 to be told I didn't have stomach cancer. So we're talking, I was a heavy... So I think I've always been interested in the body, and my sister's a GP, although she's never killed anyone, I have to say that at every public occasion. I think part of writing... Look, I think the body is incredibly interesting, and the sort of... And in a way, maybe, if you're looking for where's the high stakes for any human being, if you're a kind of, lucky middle-class Australian person, able-bodied Australian person, it's hard to find the danger. But the danger we're all facing is we're walking around in these bodies that can go wrong, or can make babies, or all sorts of other wonderful things. So I think there's sort of natural human drama in the body, and there's also a thing that I probably am writing all the lives I haven't lived. you know, I would love to be a doctor. I would love to teach English in Mexico for 3 years. These are all things I haven't done, but I get to do them through my characters. So, and you get to do it too, arguably.
And that leads us to the overall theme of the whole day today, which is about sliding doors and what if. So without giving away any spoilers, I know that's really hard. What are some of the sliding doors or what if moments for Betty?
Well, I think there's lots, aren't there? So you know, if she'd got that letter, would it have been different? When the house is bombed, certain things happen that could have gone differently. There's a whole lot of moments when things could have gone differently. There's an encounter on the boat where, out of her low self-esteem, she makes a very stupid choice that costs her happiness. But then again, maybe doesn't, because then she goes on to have different kinds of happiness. There's a moment when she's living in Mexico and she has a relationship with a much younger man. Did I mention the wish fulfillment fantasies? and she, for various reasons that I won't go into, she decides to come back to Australia and not to stay with him. But she thinks, I imagine what it would have been like had I stayed. And she gives us a sort of thumbnail sketch of what her life might have been like. And I don't know about you guys, but I do that about choices I made that could have gone differently. And she considers what might have happened. Yeah.
And there's a fantastic line at the end of that episode where Betty wonders what would have happened if she'd stayed in Mexico, and she says, I sometimes consider the alternative life like a potential storyline. So continually bringing back those sort of literary terms and allusions. And so from there, Betty moved into a new career as a book author, and Debra is going to read us something about that from the novel. So thank you.
So oh no, does it say in here? It does. Oh no, it does actually. Okay. So at one point she says, at the beginning I worried it would be a problem that I was elderly and not notable. She's 63 at this point. That I was elderly and not notable in another field, famous actor, stand-up comedian, colourful criminal. But it turned out that the book club and literary festival crowd enjoyed the idea that an old dame had started writing her first novel at 63 and then found a small amount of success. The book world is hungry for some sort of narrative surrounding the author, so that was mine. I can see in retrospect that many of the stories in my novels were sparked by curiosity about what might have happened if there had been some bend in the narrative line of my life, like switching tracks on a railway system. It was driven by curiosity, but also greediness, a greed to live many more lives than just the one. Of course, and there's lots of Australian novelists like Olga Masters and Elizabeth Joly who started writing late in life. That's not my story, because, you know, I was given a typewriter for my 12th birthday because I said I was going to be a playwright. So I've never been able to run that narrative. But I can give it to Betty.
And just thinking about your own life, are there any sliding doors or what-if moments that you would like to share with us?
I think, so a professional one is that Offspring was a project, for people who don't know, it was a television series that I was the creator of that ran for 5 seasons. They then made some other seasons, but I wasn't involved. And that was a project that I pitched and it was rejected everywhere for like nearly 4 years. And the producer found this little hole in the kind of Channel 10 schedule and said, let's do it. And he pushed it, and I had 3 weeks to write the telly movie. And I very nearly said no. My confidence was very low at the time. And I happened that night to go to a blues gig, and I watched the musicians, you know, bouncing off each other, you know, making something new together. And I thought, oh, you know, I want to do that again. I want to work with clever people and make something new. And I texted the producer from the venue and I said, we can do it. So Offspring has been a great gift in my life. Although it didn't happen till I was 50. I mean, I've made a living as a writer since I was sort of 18, but that my big success arguably didn't happen till I was 50. So it didn't spin my head around like it might have done. But maybe, if I'd had some huge success when I was 25, maybe that would have mucked me up. So that's a professional one. And I think the biggest blessing in my life is that I have a really wonderful partner, and that's made a lot of other things possible. Like, I don't think I would have kept going as a writer for 50 years without him. And we met at ANU. He happened to come back from London. I happened to be hanging around the ANU refectory. I was putting on theatre shows. He came in, offered to paint my sets. That's not a... it's not. He really did just paint my sets. And the luck of that, of two people who are right for each other meeting... You know, I don't believe in the one, but I do believe there's a lot of luck in meeting the right person at the time when you're both, you know. And we were both with other people when we first met, but we were friends for a year and then, you know. So that's the biggest, you know, that's extraordinary luck, isn't it?
Yes. So my last question before we open it to your questions is, you touched on confidence. Betty's voice changes over the 100 years, from a young girl living in a very difficult situation to a more confident woman over time. She can even do things like learns how to harness and use rage, for example, to stand up for things that she believes in. So do you hear Betty's voice in your head? And what might she want to tell us this afternoon?
Oh, my God. Yeah, Betty's full of rage. And, I mean, I would argue she harnesses rage when she's 7. That scene, there's a scene when she's 7 years old. And, again, this happened to my mum, where they measured all the children to see if they were malnourished or not. And if they were, and my mum was singled out and brought out the front for being malnourished, and they fed them a spoonful of malt powder and a spoonful of cod liver oil that they had to down on the spot, as if that's going to kind of cure poverty. And Betty uses the F word at the age of 7. And she gets in a lot of trouble for it, but I think she thinks it's worth it. So she's got rage, but she can't control it. And I think, as you say, as she gets older, she learns to kind of use it for good. Because I think and I think a lot of older people, and particularly older women, feel this. We're angry, aren't we? That there's stuff that's gone wrong that should have been fixed by now, and it's not fixed. And the only way... And it's interesting because I would argue that... I know at the moment the world feels like it's taking a turn downwards, and I think it is. But if you pull back, and this is a 100-year camera angle, you would rather be a woman, a person of colour, gay in 2028 than you would in 1928, wouldn't you? And a lot of things are better because people worked hard to fix them, and we should remember those women who worked hard to fix some aspects of sexism, but we shouldn't be complacent because arguably those women made things better. Well, lots of people work to fight injustice of all kinds, but particularly thinking about women. And we should honour them, and we should be charged up to think, well, they saw something wrong and they fixed it. So there's lots of things wrong in the world at the moment, so the onus is on us to fix them as best we can. So I guess she's telling us that.
Fantastic. So... While we're getting ready for your questions and the mics are coming around, Debra is everywhere. You might have seen today's Sydney Morning Herald.
The photo's from 3 years ago. I was younger then, and a very talented... Do you know, that photo was taken by a young woman. I've written a lot of plays for the Australian Theatre for young people, and when this young woman was a very young woman, she was in one of my plays, and now she's one of the best photographers in the country, and she took my photo.
Yeah, beautiful photo.
Are the men in the story worth talking about?
Yes. There's lots of fabulous men because,
Good.
Yes, because I love men and Betty loves men, sometimes with quite a lot of gusto. And I have 2 sons and I have 3 grandsons, so I've got a stake in wanting men to be marvellous, and I happen to think they are. So there's a love story that runs through it. Betty has a brother that she's very close to, who's a very important part of the little bit of feeling she's lovable, because she worries that she's not lovable, but her brother makes her feel lovable. And Betty has a son, I don't want to give stuff away, who I love and who is a vulnerable person, but a gorgeous person. So there's lots of men in the book, and am I missing out someone important? She on the boat she meets Leo, who's a German Jew, who's a displaced person, and he's very important in her life. Betty's sexual awakening is a big thread in the book. I mean, one of the suspense storylines is when and how Betty will have her first orgasm, which is as it should be, and because I think it's an important part of life. I don't want to leave it out. So I had a lot of fun with that, I must say, and like. I should say, there's a tradition with one of my Offspring colleagues that he comes to all my book launches and reads one of the sex scenes from the book aloud to embarrass me. And last week he flew from Melbourne to read a sex scene in front of my children, my grandchildren. Yeah. There was a question here.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering. I was just thinking that some of those books and movies and things that are just like they move through a long period of time and touch on lots and lots of different historical events. I guess they could have a tendency to kind of be, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, event after event after event. And I'm absolutely sure that your book doesn't do that, and I'll find out in a minute when I buy it and read it. Yeah. But how did you fear that you're
Absolutely.
Just ticking off the Vietnam War or whatever? How did you avoid it as a writer?
I don't know. I hope I did. I don't know that I entirely did. And I was and again, this is low self-esteem. I was so worried about the book being too long that my fear about the book is that I went too fast at times, because I thought, I'm so worried about boring people because I'm not worthy. Isn't it terrible? I'm 65 and I still feel like this. And actually, while we're on the subject, that's another thing that the book is about. It's about the way some of the childhood damage is still in us and affecting how we think and feel, even though it's illogical and stupid and all that. So that was probably part of it. Then again, I didn't want the book to be impossibly long. I suppose the way I tried to avoid that was that it's always about Betty's point of view and where she's at in her emotional development. And we keep returning to characters that we've known for a long time. And I also I didn't want her to be an outlier. I didn't want it to be a story about a woman who's at the front of a march. She's just another woman in the room. Like, she's not, at times, like, it's not, I didn't want her to be exceptional. I wanted it to be, every woman's the wrong word, but I wanted it to be always plausible that she's not in the centre of every world event in some ridiculous way, and she's not more rebellious and amazing and insightful than a woman would actually have been at that time. So, but look, I get what you're saying, and that's possibly the danger in the book. I hope that if there are moments when you feel that, it's compensated by the fact that you get that sweep, and maybe to have the sweep you have to sacrifice a little bit of sitting with things longer.
I guess that lady might have been referring to Forrest Gump, but for me, I'm reading this book and just loving it. There was one part...
Woman of taste and discernment.
There was just one part that just filled me with so much joy and optimism. I felt like it was the Anne of Green Gables.
Oh.
And
which bit?
Beth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I would love to see this book as a movie. So what do you think your chances are?
Great. So do you know any
not me
financiers
no.
or... Look, I mean, I would love that, but I think like, where's Family Doctor? Family Doctor should be a television series too, and there's a pilot script, and it's been pitched everywhere by the same producer who makes the newsreader. So, not for want of trying. I've got to the point where I cannot hope for things that are going to wreck my enjoyment of what I have.
So you readers have to do it for you.
Yeah, I didn't write it to be a television series. I wrote it to be a book, and if it gets another life, great. But what I like about writing novels is that I get to create the world and share the characters with whoever wants to read the book, and that's better than your stories. I've got a pile under my house of scripts that have never been made, and that bloody is corrosive to the guts. So I don't want that to happen again. So I think it's novels for me from now on. You know. Well, you know. It's too Australian. It's got a lot of it's set in the UK, so, and Mexico.
Any other questions?
I picked Mexico because I love Mexico. I've been there a couple of times. I have a very dear Mexican friend who I could ring and say, help me with this. So that's why. And I'm going again in September. There's a scene in it where Betty swims in a cenote. I don't know if anyone's swum in a cenote. These sort of limestone pools in Yucatan. And I've done it, but I'm going to go back there in September because I'm thinking, damn it, that character should not have experiences. And I've never been to Castellorizo. So I'm going to go to Castellorizo, which is a tiny Greek island. So I'll be damned if my characters are going to have fun that I haven't had. So.
Hi, I'm wondering how many people in this room have written their mother's story, and in fact that in doing so, it's done what you've presented to us as Betty. I recently wrote my mother's story to pass on to my next generation.
Oh, fantastic.
And to the next one beyond that, so that they understood what she went through.
Yes.
And the choices she didn't have.
Yes,
in
exactly.
her life.
I think that's really great. I do wish I'd asked my mother more questions, and I bet everyone feels that.
Yeah.
I wish that I'd asked more questions, and my dad too. So I suppose run home now and interview your family.
Well, I think it's wonderful that in fact you've put into novel form for young people. When you mentioned earlier, you wanted it to be for younger readers as well.
Well, everybody, hopefully.
Yep.
Yeah, but yes,
Thank you.
Yes, I absolutely agree.
Any other questions?
People go home and write your mother's story.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I think it's a very important thing to do. Yes.
All right, well, Deborah's going to be signing her books up after this session, so take the opportunity to meet her and find out more about Betty. And Debra is certainly a character herself. She is wise and witty, so please join me in thanking her.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. That was